chapter 19. 2 Kings, chapter 19. We'll read verses 1 through verse 5. And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Sheba, the scribe and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz. And they said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord thy God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria, his master, hath sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. The parallel passage to this is Isaiah 37, verses 3 and 4, where you have Isaiah writing of this event. It takes place, of course, in a time of great crisis for the southern kingdom of Judah. In our text, verse 1, we see Hezekiah. He's in the house of the Lord, no doubt seeking God in prayer. Verse 2, we can gather that the Lord gave him instruction to send a message to Isaiah. And the message that he sent to Isaiah is recorded in verses 3 and 4. Verse 5, the message is delivered to Isaiah by Hezekiah's servants. Again, the content of the message from Hezekiah to Isaiah is recorded in verses 3 and 4. And in that, there's a general statement regarding the situation. This is a day of trouble. It's a day of problems, difficulties, concerns, distress. It's also a day of rebuke. That is, reprimands and threats from the enemy, and blasphemy, profanity, and irreverence. The enemy was at the door. Doom was on the horizon. And the message from Hezekiah informed Isaiah of the seriousness of the hour. He says, the children, referring to God's people, are come to the birth. That's the seriousness. And then the condition of the people. There is no strength to bring forth. And then the message from Hezekiah to Isaiah closes with a request for prayer. But it's not a request for all the children that he has mentioned, but to lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. Hezekiah, in order to get the seriousness of the message across, uses the image of a woman about to deliver a child. But there's a problem. Her strength has been exhausted. And she is unable to do what will be required of her. And this was the condition of the kingdom of Judah. Again, the children are come to the birth. And the condition of them is there's not strength to bring forth. And what we read here is not only a picture of Hezekiah's day, but it's also an accurate portrayal of God's people today. And the last part of verse 4, there's Hezekiah's request to Isaiah. Lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. It's almost as if he's given up on the children are come to the birth. He says, pray for the remnant. They're already gone. He says, they're already gone. Pray for the remnant that are left. A remnant is a small part of the whole. A remnant is separate and apart, in this case, from the children are come to the birth, and there's no strength to bring forth. So the remnant's apart from these. It's a remnant of the faithful. They do not belong to the masses. They do not belong to the children who are come to the birth. And there is no strength to bring forth. These are separate. But these are the ones he requests prayer for. They are the ones who stay. The remnant are the ones who stay with the Word of God. The ones who continue to seek after the Lord. And Hezekiah says, lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. This reveals that Hezekiah had the right concern, and he knew the real need. He knew the real need. Our subject is, pray for the remnant that is left. First of all, let's look at the circumstances, or the setting, or the circumstances of the text. Again, what takes place here is during the reign of Judah's 13th king, Hezekiah. Just prior to his reign was the reign of his father, Ahaz. And Ahaz reigned for 16 years. And we are told in 2 Kings 16, verse 2, and he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord. The overall character of the reign of Ahaz is described in 2 Kings 16, verses 3 and 4. We'll not go there to save time, but you can read it. In the course of 16 years, there was great spiritual decline in the kingdom of Judah. They were moving further and further from God. And they were abandoning the worship of God. And God's people were being brought more and more into conformity with the ungodly nations around them. And we learn from 2 Chronicles 28, verse 24, that Ahaz had cut in pieces the vessels of the house of God. And he had shut up the doors of the Lord and made him altars in every corner of Jerusalem. By the end of the reign of Ahaz, Judah was in a very advanced stage of sin. From 2 Kings 18 verse 1, we see that Hezekiah, Ahaz's son, began his reign in the 3rd year of Hoshea. Now Hoshea was the last king of the northern kingdom of Israel. From 2 Kings 18 verses 1 through 8, we see that Hezekiah led a reformation in Judah. And though the Reformation was spiritual in nature, the hearts and the lives of the people, for the most part, remained far away from God. It would be like a revival meeting today. It's spiritual in nature, but hearts and lives were not changed. Hearts and lives weren't changed. And people say, we had revival. No, you didn't. You had a revival meeting. And in the 4th year of Hezekiah's reign, after years of the neighboring northern kingdom embracing idolatry and immorality, and after years of insensitivity to the messengers and the message of God, God raises up Shalmaneser as king of Syria. We read of that in 2 Kings 18 verse 9. And he emboldens him and empowers him to go against the northern kingdom. And he surrounds it. And in 2 Kings 18:10 we see that the northern kingdom of Israel falls to Assyria. Sennacherib, he would follow Shalmaneser as king of Israel. And in the 14th year of Hezekiah, which would be about 8 years after the fall of the northern kingdom, Assyria threatens the southern kingdom of Judah. And Sennacherib sends 3 of his chief men with a great host to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah sends out 3 men to meet these. And then Sennacherib tells the representatives of Hezekiah, you go and tell Hezekiah that we're going to destroy Judah, just as we did Israel. And you will not be able to get help from Egypt. You will not be able to get help from any other nation. And just so you know, not even your God will be able to deliver you. The 3 men that Hezekiah had sent return unto Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and in a state of great fear told him the message from Sennacherib. And that brings us to our text. Again, the enemy was at the door. Doom was on the horizon. A crisis was at hand. And coming to our text, we find Hezekiah in the house of the Lord. And he sends Eliakim and Sheba and the elders of the priest to inform Isaiah of the situation. That brings us to the image of the text, or the message that Hezekiah sent to Isaiah. Again, he says, the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. The purpose of that expression was to stress the condition of God's people in a particular time of crisis. It was a proverbial expression, painting a picture of a people void of the strength to do what was required. This expectant mother in the image, she should have been prepared for this hour to deliver a child. But there's not strength to bring forth. This is an extremely dangerous predicament that could have dire consequences. The children are come to the birth. An important and vital and very consequential time had come for the nation of Judah. But there was a very serious problem. The problem's not Assyria. The problem is there's not strength to bring forth. The expectant mother, no doubt, had anticipated this day when she would deliver the child. But when the time came, for a lot of reasons, she was drained, she was fatigued to do what was required. She's in a condition that would not meet the need of the hour. He's describing the condition of God's people in the kingdom. Again, this expectant mother, she knew that this time was coming. She should have been preparing. She should have been in a state of health to deliver. But there's not strength to bring forth. She does not have what it's going to take to endure the travail of birth. Again, she knew this day was coming, but she does not have what it's going to take. In Bible days, that would have put both mother and child in grave danger. So this is a very critical situation. It's a dreadful situation. It's an alarming and desperate situation. Again, Assyria is not the problem. No doubt would be a time of great uneasiness and anxiety and stress. And Hezekiah's message to Isaiah is, Isaiah, we are in dire straits as a nation. We are being threatened by the enemy. But that's not the real problem. And God's people do not have the strength. They do not have the power. They do not have the vigor. They do not have the health to meet the situation. That's the message he's delivering to Isaiah. But there is a remnant. And Isaiah, lift up your prayer for that remnant. Again, the children are come to the birth, and there's not strength to bring forth. Those are grievous words. The enemy is at the door. Doom is on the horizon. And Hezekiah's words to Isaiah are, there is not strength to bring forth. So notice what was the most fearful, dismal, and distressing thing was the condition of God's people. It was not Assyria. It was not the threats of Assyria. But there is not strength to bring forth. But Isaiah, there is a remnant. There is a small part of the whole. Lift up thy prayer for the remnant. So again, as we've stressed many times, the main problem is not the enemy. That's not the main problem. Unless you're thinking about the enemy within yourself. The main problem was the spiritual condition of God's people to meet the situation. In our text, the enemy of God's people had risen up. But the most fearful and distressing and alarming matter was God's people did not have the strength to meet the need of the hour. The children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. The strength of the people of God was not. And this, not Assyria, was the main problem. The problem, the majority of the people were not in a spiritual condition to meet the need of the hour. But there's a remnant. Apart from these, and therefore the request, lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. Judah, like the northern kingdom of Israel, had been greatly blessed of God. But they had taken the blessings of God for granted. There came a point where they ignored the prophets of God. And they did not take the Word of God seriously. And they moved further and further from God, dismissing Him more and more from their thoughts and lives, putting other things in the place of God, putting more esteem upon fleshly matters than the matters of God. And now, strength to endure the crisis was not. It did not exist. And that, of course, would simply add to the crisis. And in reality, is the crisis. Again, the main problem was not Assyria. The main problem was there's not strength to bring forth. And that brings us to the application to ourselves. We, like the kingdom of Judah, find ourselves in what is described in our text as a day of trouble, rebuke, and blasphemy. An enemy far greater, far more powerful, more bold, more relentless, more determined than the nation of Assyria in Hezekiah's day. An enemy far more powerful than Assyria has ransacked, looted, and stripped this nation, leaving a path of ruin. But just as in our text, as powerful, wicked, and threatening as Assyria was, Assyria was not the biggest problem at hand. The most pressing problem was there is not strength to bring forth. And here we are. We are a nation. We are a society under a plague that has infected government. It has infected the judicial system, the educational system. It is a plague that has wreaked havoc upon families, upon marriages, upon homes. It is a plague that has stripped them of respect and faith and values and morality and integrity, sanity, and common sense. And we can say with Hezekiah, this is a day of trouble. This is a day of rebuke. This is a day of blasphemy. But also hear him say, for the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. That needs to sink in. That needs to grip our hearts. He is saying, in addition to Assyria, in addition to that problem, God's people are not what they ought to be. And as a result, God's people are not equipped for what is before them. And this was more troublesome to Hezekiah than the threat of Assyria. Satan and our sinful flesh are masterful in convincing ourselves that the problem is out there. That's where the problem is. You take care of out there and everything will be fine. You've been duped if you think that way. Satan and our sinful flesh are very skillful in getting us to divert the blame from ourselves and to focus upon whatever scenario is out there. But we read, for the children are come to the birth, and there's not enough strength to bring forth. Do you really think? People say, oh, there's all kinds of dangers and threats on the horizon, no doubt. But do you think for a moment that the majority of God's people are equipped? to meet the problem? You're looking at something completely different than I am, if you think that way. They're not. They're not. They are a big part of the problem. This was a greater cause of alarm to Hezekiah than Assyria, the condition of God's people. And here we are. We have mountain ranges of problems. Most brought on by ourselves, I'm talking about the general population. Mountain range of dangers and threats. But the most problematic thing is the condition of God's people. It's no wonder that God said in 2 Chronicles 7, if my people. You see, that's where the problem is. If my people. If my people would only be what they're supposed to be. God's people. The very ones who by the almighty power of God have passed from death unto life. The very ones who have their names written in the Lamb's book of life. The very ones who've been bought with the shed blood of God's Son. The very ones who've been redeemed from the curse of the law and from the power of darkness and have been set free from the clutches of sin and Satan and have been delivered from the wrath to come. The very ones who have the forgiveness of sins. The very ones who've been reconciled to God and have peace with God. The very ones who are the children of God. The heirs of God and the joint heirs with Jesus Christ. The very ones who have an inheritance in heaven. The very ones who are rich and eternally secure and clothed in His righteousness. The very ones who are allowed to have fellowship with the great God of heaven. Find themselves in these words. There's not strength to bring forth. And here we are. When the very people of God have forgotten their identity. They have forgotten who they are. The sons and daughters of God. We're not dad and mom first. We're not grandma and grandpa first. We're the sons and daughters of God, who happen to be moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas. But that's not first. And we've been put here to live for Him and serve for Him. And we've been hearing all of our lives, and it's been true. Judgment is coming, and it's at the door. It's at the door. But there's a problem. God's people do not have what it takes. God's people are not what they ought to be, and therefore they cannot do what they ought to do. Same problem as in Hezekiah's day. God's people have become so distracted, so consumed and entangled in the affairs of life that they can't serve God. And they can't worship God. Just like in our text, they do not have the strength to do what needs to be done. They don't have it. It's not there. God's people, for the most part, there is a remnant, are content very content with a mere form of godliness rather than spiritual substance. In fact, I would go as far as to say that most of God's people want nothing to do with spiritual substance. That is shown in the preaching of the day. It is shown in a lot of different ways. They want nothing to do with it. They are content with a platitude every now and then rather than a vibrant relationship with the Lord. And here we are. And many of God's people are trapped in the prisons and dungeons of the world. And they go through life dragging around a ball and chain. Lives empty. And here we are when many of God's people, they don't want their comfort disturbed. They exhaust all their energy in worldly matters, busying themselves in worldly pursuits, putting more esteem on worldly matters than God. That's where we are today. And it's when, outside of this remnant, most think they're doing pretty good if service to God is just a sideline. We're never put here for God to be a sideline. God is a sideline that people just will fit into their busy schedule when they can. That's a problem. They do that rather than have a life commitment. And that's true of most pastors as well. There's a generation of pastors that know absolutely nothing about surrender to the Lord. They want no part of it. Here we are when the lives of God's people, far more characterized by unbelief than faith, far more characterized by worry than assurance, more characterized by frustration than peace, more characterized by discouragement and misery than joy, more characterized by doubt than godly conviction, more swayed by the world than thus saith the Lord, and more influenced and impacted by the world's ways than God's ways. People have had their hearts stolen, and they've fallen into the traps of the flesh, the world, and Satan. And their spiritual interest, their spiritual enthusiasm, their spiritual conviction has been consumed. Far more invested in the world than they are in the Lord. Priorities in the world. More dictated by the world. Consumed by worldly mindedness and covetousness and idolatry and spiritual coldness and pride. because I'm not like what's out there. I'm righteous. That's the attitude of most. That's why they love hearing preaching about what's wrong out there. Doesn't disturb their comfort zone at all. What it does is brings them further and further in the sad spiritual state they're in. As a result, what we read in our text is sadly true. Where the children are come to the birth, and there's not strength to bring forth. We live in a time of great urgency. People ask me every now and then, what's your biggest concern about the future? My answer is always the same. God's people. The condition of God's people. Well, what about all the homosexual? And go, run the list. Yeah, those are problems. That's not the biggest one. The biggest problem is God's people. The condition that they've allowed themselves to be in. Just like this woman in our text. She knew this day was coming. She obviously did not prepare. She wasn't ready. In our text, verse 4, it's almost an unusual request. Isaiah, would you pray for the remnant that are left? You would expect him to say, the children have not strength. Isaiah, would you pray for them? That's not what he says. And I believe it's because they're gone. There is a point of no return. And he says, Isaiah, there is a remnant. A small group. Pray for them. Pray for them. That's his main concern. This remnant are those who are humbled before God. There is a remnant. Oh, to be a part of that remnant. There is still a remnant who are responsive to the voice and movement of God. There's still a remnant that are absorbed with God. A people who are submissive to God. A people who acknowledges God in all things. A people filled with thanksgiving and praise and worship. A people that are moving toward God. Clinging to God. Seeking to glorify God. A people identified with God. A people forsaking and turning and fleeing from sin. A people aroused and stirred by God. There is a remnant. There's still a people who live in the realization that God is worthy of all. There's still a people, a remnant, and I believe it's getting smaller every day. They cannot love Him enough. And they cannot do enough in His service. And they have a right attitude toward God's day. And they have a right attitude toward God's house. And they have a right attitude toward God's book. And they have a right attitude toward God's man. And they have a right attitude towards God's people. There is a remnant. Pray for them. Pray for them. Again, it's like the others, they're already gone. Pray for this remnant. It's the only hope. that we have to meet what's before us. There's still a people whose purpose, whose aim, and whose passion is God. There's still a people who can rise above what's out there. A people that can emerge from the appalling indifference of God's people. There is a people, there is a remnant who have not snuggled into their comfort zone and do not want to be disturbed. There is a people, a remnant, getting smaller all the time. They're able to rise above the formality and the superficial and the flippant and carefree attitude that is so prevalent amongst the children of God. It is a people that get up every day and plan to serve God. I'm going to serve God. I have other responsibilities, I have other duties, but I'm going to serve God. There's a remnant. God's not going to be a sideline until everything aligns. And that'll never happen. Thank God for the remnant. Again, I believe it's getting smaller by the day. But there is a remnant. I believe God always has a remnant. Noah's day, Babylonian captivity, God has a remnant. We need to be concerned for the remnant, for the faithful. The majority have left. They're not serious about God. They're never going to be serious about God. But there is a people. Pray for them. God, give them strength to continue on. We have this terrible habit of praying for the backslidden. Nothing wrong with praying for the backslidden. But no one mentions the faithful. Pray for the faithful. I believe we need to reverse the emphasis. They've gone out. They're not what they should be. They never have been what they should be. They never will be. Oh, we need to pray for them. We need to pray for the faithful. That God will keep them faithful. That they would stay clean in a depraved and degenerate and reprobate society and culture. That they would continue to possess faith. That they would continue to live their faith in the midst of unbelief. That they would maintain godly conviction in the midst of instability. That they would maintain strict adherence to truth in a society and culture saturated with heresy and blasphemy. That they would continue to live boldly and courageously in a harassing society. Pray for the remnant that are left, that they continue to live undeniably for God. That they would maintain commitment and devotion and loyalty to God in the midst of powerful enemies and barriers. Pray for the remnant that they become not their surroundings. How many people we've watched become their surroundings? That's human nature. That's human nature. I'm convinced that one of the reasons that God's people are addicted to social media, the news cycles, is because it reminds them the problem's out there. I'm not the problem. You keep telling yourself that. You keep letting others tell you that. That's what they do. Pray for the remnant. Hezekiah realized the situation with Assyria. He wasn't ignoring it. He realized it's a problem. But he recognized the main problem to be the condition of God's people. And I believe that's so today as well. And he also realized that there was a faithful few. And he says to Isaiah, Isaiah, lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. Again, implying the others are gone. They're gone. But there are some that are left. Pray for them. Thanks be to God for the remnant. Thanks be to God for the remnant. Pray for them. Pray for them. God would help them. Brother Ben, if you come and lead us